I did not want a mate. Let me be honest about that from the first word, because the story I am about to tell deserves honesty more than it deserves flattery, and I was not, in the years before she came, a man who understood the difference. I was the Alpha King of Valdenmoor, lord of the 7 river holds strung along the Sorvin like stone beads on a winter current, and I had ruled them for 31 years in the way I understood ruling, firmly, quietly, without waste. My father had ruled the same way before he died, his father before him. The Sorvin ran north to south through our territory, and it did not ask anyone's permission to keep running, and neither did I. That was the model. That was what I knew. I had never taken a mate. My council had brought me women before, daughters of allied packs, Luna candidates from the eastern shore holds, once even a noblewoman from the Graven Accord who had hair like river ice and a smile that was practiced to the last degree. I had refused them all, not cruelly. I was not a cruel man, but with a finality that left no room for argument because that, too, was the model. My wolf had not objected. That was what I told myself. My wolf was old enough and steady enough to understand duty, and duty said Valdenmoor needed a strong alliance more than it needed a Luna. My council said otherwise every season in the patient way that councils say things they know will eventually land. But the Sorvin still ran. The holds were still fed. The treaty lines held. What was missing? Nothing, I told myself. I was wrong, of course, but I did not know it yet. The arrangement came out of necessity, as most honest arrangements do. The Havorn Pack, 3 settlements on the southern reach of the Sorvin, good people, grass steppe fighters who had held the southern border against raiding packs for 60 years, had been brought low by 2 bad winters and a sickness that had moved through their wolves the previous spring. They were not broken, but they were thin, and the crevasse pack to their east could smell thin. Their elder, a man named Dorvath who had gray in his beard and iron in his eyes, came to Valdenmoor's great hall in the early weeks of the cold season and laid the situation out plainly. He did not beg. I respected him for that. He said the Havorn needed the shield of Valdenmoor's name and Valdenmoor's numbers. He said they had little to offer in trade or treaty weight that would satisfy my council in the usual way. He said, and here he paused, and I saw something in his face that was not comfortable for either of us. He said his daughter had agreed, of her own will, to offer herself as the arrangement. I looked at him for a long moment. Your daughter, I said. Senna, he said. She is 26. She is not what you would expect from this offer. She is not a political creature. She did not come from a lineage of arranged alliances. She is simply a good woman who loves her people and understands what the Havorn needs. He paused again. She asked to come, I want you to know that. I would not give a daughter who did not ask. I believed him. I do not know why with such certainty, but I did. My council wanted me to take 3 days to consider. I took 1 evening. The calculation was not complicated. The Havorn held ground that mattered. The crevasse pack was a problem I had been watching grow for 4 years. A mate I had not chosen was still, functionally, a political instrument, and I had been a political instrument my whole life. It was not so different. I told Dorvath yes. I told myself this would change nothing about the way I lived. My wolf, for the first time in years, stirred in a way I could not immediately categorize. She arrived on a morning when the Sorvin was throwing off ice mist, the kind that makes the whole river look like it is dreaming. I was at the main gate of Valdenmoor's central hold, not because I was eager, but because my council had pointed out that meeting her in the great hall like a transaction would be a poor beginning, and even I could see the logic. So I stood at the gate with 2 of my senior wolves, Aldrich and Penn, and I watched the Havorn party come up the north road. There were 8 of them, Dorvath, 4 pack-guard riders, 2 women who appeared to be her attendants and her. I knew her immediately, which was strange because I had no description. She was not riding at the front. She was toward the middle on a pale gray horse, wearing a wool traveling cloak the color of heather, and she was looking at the river, not at the hold. Not at me. Everyone else in the party was watching the hold, watching me, making the small adjustments of people who know they are being observed. She was watching the Sorvin. As they came through the gate and she finally looked up and saw me, her expression did not change in the way I expected. There was no performance of deference, no performance of anything. She met my eyes with a kind of steady, open regard that I can only describe as someone looking at what is actually in front of them rather than what they have been told to expect. Alpha King, she said when she had dismounted and the greetings had been made. Her voice was even, clear the way still water is clear. Senna, I said. She inclined her head. Dorvath was watching us both. The ice mist was still coming off the Sorvin. My wolf had gone absolutely quiet inside me, not the quiet of disinterest, the quiet of a creature that has just scented something and stopped moving in order not to lose it. I noted this, I filed it away, I said nothing about it to anyone. I had given her rooms in the hold's east tower, comfortable rooms, well-appointed, with a window that faced the river. My housekeeper, a woman named Corva who had managed the hold's domestic order since before I was Alpha, showed her in. I did not see Senna again until that evening at table. She sat at the far end of the hall table between her two attendants. She did not sit near me. This was correct. The arrangement had been made, but nothing formal had been spoken yet, and I had not invited her closer. What I noticed was that she was talking to Aldrich's mate, a quiet woman named Hessel who was 8 months along and sat at table with the careful deliberateness of late pregnancy. Senna was making her laugh. Not loudly, the laugh was small, surprised, genuine, and Hessel was touching Senna's hand with the ease of someone who has known a person for years rather than minutes. This was not what I had expected. What had I expected? I am not sure. Nervousness, perhaps, or the careful, bright performance of a woman trying to make a good impression on a strange king. Instead, she was simply at table, simply talking, simply making an 8 months along woman feel seen. As if that were the most natural thing in the world. I ate my meal, and I looked at the Sorvin through the hall's long window, and I told my wolf to settle. My wolf did not settle. The formal ceremony was held 3 days later in the hold's great hall, before the pack's senior wolves and Dorvath's delegation. It was brief. It was dignified. She stood beside me in a winter-gray dress that was simple enough to be honest and fine enough to be appropriate, and when the pack elder who performed the rite asked if she came willingly, she said yes without hesitation or performance. When he asked the same of me, I said yes with the same quality of voice I used to approve treaty documents, and if she noticed the difference, she gave no sign. Dorvath stayed for 3 more days to see the matter settled. On the morning he left, I came into the courtyard to find Senna standing with him at his horse, her hand in both of his, saying something I could not hear. He was looking at her the way fathers look at daughters they are trying to memorize. When he saw me, he straightened, and the moment was released. "Take care of your Alpha King," he told her. "Take care of the Sorvin South Reach," she told him. He laughed, a real laugh, the first I had heard from him. He rode out. She stood in the courtyard after the party had gone and watched the road until the last rider was out of sight. I waited at the doorway, not sure why I was still there. When she finally turned and saw me, she did not look embarrassed to be caught in grief. "He is your whole pack in one person," I said. I don't know why I said it. It was not the sort of thing I usually said. "Yes," she said, "he is." And then, "Thank you for meeting him honestly, he needed to see that." I did not know what to do with that. I nodded and went back to my morning's business, and for the rest of that day I noticed, with some irritation, that I kept thinking about the quality of her voice when she said it. "Thank you for meeting him honestly," as if honesty were a gift I had given rather than simply the minimum of what a man should be. She did not ask for much. This was the first thing I learned about her, and it ran counter to almost everything my counsel had quietly prepared me for. They had assumed, gently, professionally, that a woman brought into a strange hold under a political arrangement would have needs, assurances, introductions, managed access to the pack hierarchy, a clear sense of her role and status. They had prepared a plan for this. Corva had a schedule. Senna disregarded the schedule entirely, not from willfulness, but because she was already busy with something else. By the end of her first week, she had found the hold's fishing wolves, 3 elderly wolves who managed the Sorvin seasonal fish runs, and were, I was told later, among the most overlooked members of the pack's extended household, because their work happened at the river's edge before most of the hold was awake. She was down there with them at dawn every morning. Not managing them, not interfering. Helping. Learning the work first, then helping. Aldrich mentioned it to me in passing on the 4th day, with the mild surprise of a man reporting something he doesn't quite have a category for. "She was at the river again this morning," he said. "Old Thresh says she's learning to read the current for the winter runs." I said nothing. "She brought them bread from the kitchen," he added. "Apparently she made it herself." I said nothing to this either, but something about it lodged in me like a splinter. the image of her in the gray dawn at the river's edge, learning an old wolf's trade, carrying bread she had made with her own hands. On the 7th day, I walked down to the Sorvin at dawn. Not to see her. I told myself I was checking the river level. Winter had been slow to harden the upper reaches, and the ice flow patterns mattered for the holds further north. This was true. It was also not the reason I was down there. She was there, standing at the water's edge with Old Thresh watching the current. She heard me on the bank and turned, and for a moment, one unguarded moment before her expression settled, I saw something on her face that was not the steady composure I had come to expect. Something that might have been gladness, fast as a fish gone beneath the surface. "Alpha King," she said. "Bran," I said. I did not mean to say it. It came out before I could root it through the usual formality. She looked at me for a moment. "Bran," she said, trying the word as if testing its weight. Old Thresh was watching us with the frank interest of a man who has been at a river long enough to know what currents do when two things meet. "The north current is pulling east," I said, looking at the water. "It means a cold snap in 10 days. Thresh will want to move the winter nets to the eastern deep channel before it locks." Thresh gave me a look that was half surprise and half satisfaction, as if I had passed a test I hadn't known I was sitting. "Aye," he said. "That's what I was just telling the lady." I left before it became something it wasn't. But walking back up the bank, I realized my wolf had been absolutely still the whole time I was at the water. Not the wall quiet, something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like peace. The first time she made me something without being asked, it was river broth. It was a month after her arrival. The Sorvin had locked hard in the cold snap I'd predicted, and I had been out with the northern border wolves for 3 days assessing the ice weight on the upper hold's foundations. Cold, tedious, necessary work that left me stiff in a way that had not bothered me in my younger years, and bothered me now. I came back to the hold in the dark of early evening to find a covered pot outside my study door. I stood and looked at it for a full 10 seconds. Inside the pot, when I lifted the cover, river broth, the kind with the river herbs and the long-simmered bones that takes most of a day to do properly. Hot, still steaming. There was no note. She would have known I'd been cold because the whole hold knew I'd been on the upper reach. She had simply made broth and left it. I ate the entire pot. I did not go to thank her. I did not know how to do it without it becoming a thing larger than it was, and I was not ready for it to be large. But I found the next morning that I noticed the absence of her at the dawn table before I noticed anything else. She was there, she was always there, quietly in her place, and the noticing of the absence before the presence was a specific thing. I knew what it meant. I had simply decided not to act on it, and there is a certain stability in a decision, even when the ground under it is shifting. What broke the first wall was not a dramatic thing. It was a she-wolf named Marit. Marit was 30 years old and had lost her mate to the sickness that had swept through the Havorn's wolves the previous spring, not Havorn herself, but a trading partner of the holds who had passed the sickness north. Her mate had been one of Penn's close wolves, a good man, and the pack had grieved him properly. But Marit was the kind of grief that doesn't resolve in one season. She was still carrying it in her body, in the way she moved through the hall, the way she ate too little and slept too much, the way she had stopped shifting because her wolf form felt too much like her mate's absence. I knew about her grief. I had spoken to Penn about it. I did not know what to do with it beyond what I had already done. Acknowledged it, made sure she was provided for, let her find her own way. This was what I knew to do with grief. On a night in the middle of that first month, I was passing the east corridor near the hall's secondary hearth, and I heard voices. Not arguing, the low, steady sound of one person talking and another listening. I stopped. Senna was at the hearth. Marit was beside her, sitting close, her knees drawn up, her face turned toward the fire. She was talking. Senna had a hand on her back, light and still, and she was not responding with comfort words, not filling the spaces. She was just there, present, a weight on the other end of the line. I stood in the corridor for a long moment, and then I moved on. Penn told me the next morning that Marit had shifted for the first time since her mate died. He did not know why. He thought she had simply been ready. I did not tell him what I had seen at the hearth. But that evening at table, I moved my chair 2 places closer to Senna's end than I usually sat. I told myself this was incidental. She looked up when I sat, saw where I had moved, and said nothing. After a moment, she returned to her meal. There was a small smile at the corner of her mouth that she was not performing for anyone because she thought I wasn't looking. I was looking. The walls came down in pieces, and each piece took longer to acknowledge than to fall. There was the morning she told Corva that the hold's east-facing root cellar was losing warmth through the far wall, and offered, practically, a solution she had learned from the Havorn's winter stores method. And Corva, who had managed that cellar for 20 years and did not easily accept instruction, listened and then did what Senna suggested, and the cellar held its warmth through the hardest week of the cold season. I heard about this from Corva herself, which was notable because Corva had not come to me voluntarily with news in 3 years. There was the evening she asked me, at table, what the Sorvin was called before Valdenmoor had given it its name. Not because she was testing me, because she wanted to know. And when I told her the old name was Selvorin, a word from the pre-packed tongue that meant something close to the one that remembers, she said, quietly, "I like that better." And I found that I agreed and had not known it until she said it. There was the wolf cub. One of the hold's outer-range wolves had whelped in the cold and lost the runt, too small, going cold, the mother already managing 5 others and unable to keep the 6th warm enough. Penn had told me about it in the practical way these things are told. It probably would not make it. There was only so much anyone could do. We'd done what we could. I had said yes, the practical thing, and moved on. That evening I passed Senna's rooms, not intending to, passing on my way to the upper parapet, and heard something I couldn't immediately place. I stopped, knocked. She opened the door, and the cub was inside the blankets on her reading chair, wrapped in her heaviest wool, its small sides moving with the deliberate effort of something fighting for breath. She had a warming brick at its feet, and another wrapped in cloth near its back. She looked at me with the expression of someone who knows they have done something that could be called impractical and has decided they don't care. "It was going cold," she said. "I know," I said. "I asked Penn if I could bring it in. He would have said yes. He did." I looked at the cub. It was fighting hard. Small animals fighting hard for their lives was not a thing I was supposed to be moved by. I was a king. I had seen the full tally of what the world does to small things. And yet. "Do you need anything?" I asked, for it. "Warmer milk from the kitchen, if Corva won't mind." "She won't mind." The cub lived. I knew this 3 days later when Senna brought it to the morning meal tucked inside her cloak, because it was too small to walk the corridor without getting lost, and Thresh, who had wandered up from the river for reasons of his own, laughed at the sight of it, and said it was the first wolf to have slept in a Luna's rooms since before his grandfather's time. Luna, he said it easily, naturally, the way old men sometimes name a thing before the world has caught up. I did not correct him. My wolf, for the first time in perhaps a decade, made a sound that was not a question. A low, certain sound deep in my chest, the kind that means, yes, there. I still did not act on it, but the wall was thinner than it had been. She had been at Valdenmoor for 2 full months when I learned about the mistake my council had made, and very nearly could not fix. It was Penn who told me, with the expression of a man who knows he is delivering news that should have been delivered sooner. My council, specifically my senior treaty advisor, a careful, precise man named Aldrath who thought in terms of leverage and alliance weight, had sent a quiet communication to the Gravin Accord 3 weeks earlier. The Accord had been pressing Valdenmoor for a deeper alliance for 2 years. Aldrath's communication had said, without consulting me, that the Havorn arrangement was temporary, a stabilizing measure, a placeholder, and that Valdenmoor remained open to a permanent mating alliance with the Accord once the southern situation was settled. Penn put the document on my table and stood very still. I read it twice. "When?" I said. 3 weeks ago. He meant to tell you, he thought. "When did Senna find out?" Penn's face told me the answer before his mouth did. "This morning, one of the Accord's reply writers came in." The letter was addressed to Aldrath, but Corva received it by mistake, and Corva, she didn't know what it was she gave it to. "To Senna. Corva is very sorry." I was already out of the room. She was not in her rooms. She was not at the river. I found her in the hold's east corridor near the grain stores, and when I came around the corner she was standing very still with her arms folded across her body, looking at the floor. She heard me and looked up, and the expression on her face was the one I had been afraid of. Not anger, not tears, but the careful blank composure of someone who has decided to be dignified about a thing that is not dignified. "You knew," she said. It was not a question, but it was also not an accusation. It was a door she was opening a crack to see if I would be honest. "I did not," I said. "Not until 10 minutes ago." She looked at me. The careful composure held, but something behind it was listening. "Aldrath acted without my instruction," I said. "He thought in terms of leverage. He was wrong, and I will deal with him. But I need you to hear from me directly that the graving communication does not reflect my position. It does not reflect what this is." "What is this?" she asked. Still the quiet voice, but the words had an edge that was not cruelty, just the precision of someone who needs the real answer and not the diplomatic one. I was silent for a moment, not because I was composing something careful, because I was looking at what I actually believed and had been refusing to say. "You are my mate," I said. "Not a placeholder, not an arrangement, my mate. I have known it for longer than I have been willing to admit, and that failing is mine, not the arrangements." The corridor was very still. "The graving accord will receive a correction from me today," I said, "and Aldrath will understand clearly that this conversation is not one that will be had again." She did not speak for a long moment. When she did, it was not what I expected. "I am not angry with Aldrath," she said. "He thought that was what you wanted. He was reading you correctly for what you were showing him." I was showing him something incorrect. "Yes," she said. "You weren't." And there it was, not a reprimand, not a forgiveness, just the honest, clear-water truth of it, laid out between us without drama. I had been showing everyone, including her, a version of myself that was a wall, and the wall had spoken for me when I was not paying attention, and she had been the one to pay the cost. "I am sorry," I said. This was not a thing I said easily. She knew it was not, because she had been watching me for 2 months. She nodded, a small, real nod, and the careful composure shifted into something that was not composure, just her face, the real one. "I'll be at the river," she said. I was going to the river anyway. She walked past me, and I let her go, because she needed the water and the open cold to settle herself, and because I was not yet ready to say the rest of what I needed to say. Not there, in the grain store corridor, without the river. I dealt with Aldrath swiftly and without enjoyment. The man was intelligent and loyal and had made a mistake born of long habit. He had governed the king's private life the way he governed the king's treaty table, as a resource to be optimized, and he had not noticed that the resource had changed into something he did not have a column for. I made sure he understood. I sent the correction to the graving accord the same afternoon. Penn and Aldrich were both present, because I wanted witnesses to the correction, and because I wanted it known in the Hold's senior structure that the matter was settled and would not be revisited. That evening at table, she was in her usual place. I was in mine, still not beside her, still across the length of the hall because I had not moved again since that second time. But I watched her eat, and I watched her talk quietly with Hessel, who was close to her time now, and I thought about what she had said in the corridor. "He was reading you correctly for what you were showing him." This was the clearest thing anyone had said to me in years, possibly in 30 years. After the meal, when the hall was emptying, I caught her at the doorway. "Tomorrow morning," I said, "I will be at the river before dawn." She looked at me for a moment. "I know," she said, and went on to her rooms. She was already there when I arrived. The Sorvin in the gray pre-dawn light was running clear beneath the ice at its edges, the central current too fast to freeze, the way it always was in the deep of winter. Old Thresh was nowhere in sight, which I noted without comment. Senna was standing at the water's edge, her cloak around her shoulders, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. I stood beside her. Neither of us spoke for a while. The river moved. The cold sat on the morning like a held breath. "In the Havorn," she said finally, "when we could not solve something, we took it to the Tamir." She meant their river, the one she had grown up beside. "We did not expect it to solve anything. We just took it there. And somehow, standing at the water, the thing became clearer." "The Sorvin is not the Tamir," I said. "No," she said, "but it serves." I was quiet for another moment. "I have spent 30 years," I said, "ruling this place the way a river is ruled, which is to say not ruled at all, kept clear, kept moving, kept from flooding or running dry. It seemed sufficient. I convinced myself it was sufficient." She was watching the water. I did not know I was wrong, I said, until you were in the corridor after the grain store and I saw the cost of my wrongness on your face and I could not stand it. She turned and looked at me then, the full, open regard she had given me on the first morning, the look that took in what was actually there. After a moment she said, "You are not a cold man, Bran. Most of the pack would disagree. Most of the pack has been reading what you show them," she said, "the same way Aldrath did." I looked at the river. "You are not cold," she said again, quietly. "You are careful. There is a difference. Careful men make good kings. They make very lonely ones, too, if they are not careful about the right things." I did not have an answer for this. What I had was my wolf, very close to the surface now, pressing against the inside of my chest with a certainty that 31 years of walling had not trained out of it, pressing not in urgency or desperation, but in the patient, absolute way of something that simply knows. "I do not know how to do this gracefully," I said. "This thing I am trying to tell you." "You are doing it," she said. "I want you to stay," I said, "not as an arrangement, as—" I stopped. The word my wolf had been using for 2 months pressed up against the back of my teeth. "As mine," I said. "My mate, my Luna, as the reason I come down to the Sorvin before the hold is awake, which I have apparently been doing for 6 weeks without explaining why." She was quiet for a long moment. The river ran. Somewhere on the far bank, a wolf moved through the bare branch trees. "I have been watching you for 2 months," she said at last, "trying to decide whether you were the man I thought I was seeing or the man the arrangement described." A pause. "I have decided." "Which did you find?" I asked. "Both," she said, "and the man I thought I was seeing is the one who scares me more because he is the one I could." She stopped, started again. "He is the one I came to need without planning to." Something in my chest went entirely still. Not the wall, the opposite of the wall. "Then stay," I said. "I was going to," she said. "I just needed you to ask." The bond, when it fully settled between us, not the slow daily ignition of it, but the moment when it locked, when my wolf claimed it wholly and hers answered, came 3 days after the river in the most ordinary of circumstances. At table in the evening, when she reached across to pour broth into the cup of an elderly wolf hand who was sitting too far from the pot to manage it easily, and the old wolf said thank you, and she said don't mention it, and she turned back and found my eyes across the table and held them, and the thing between us was so clear and so steady that I felt it like the river's current, not pushing, just running, the way it had always been running before either of us thought to stand in the water and feel it. She saw what was in my face. Her own changed, not to composure, not to performance, but to a warmth she was not hiding anymore. I moved my chair to the seat beside her. I did not move it back. I called the holds gathering 3 days after that. Not a ceremony. I had not consulted any of the formal rites, and I did not mean to perform one. What I meant to do was simpler. I meant to say in front of the pack's senior wolves and the assembled household what was true, and to say it clearly enough that no advisor, no allied pack, no treaty consideration would mistake it again. The hall was full. Thresh had come up from the river. Marit was there, standing straighter than she had in months. Hessel was there, round and near her time, with Aldrich's arm around her. Penn was near the door. Aldrath was present, with the expression of a man who has made peace with something he should not have needed to make peace with. Senna was at my left side, not behind me, not arranged for display. Simply beside me, the way she stood at the river without performance. I said what was true. I said it plainly. I said that Senna of the Havorn was my fated mate, recognized and claimed, Luna of Valdemar, and that this had been true for longer than I had been honest about it, and that the failure of honesty was mine and not hers, and that it was now corrected. I said that the Havorn pack would have the full protection of Valdemar's treaty network, not as a trade for this arrangement, but because they were good people and good wolves who deserved a strong neighbor. I said that anyone who had a question about either matter could come to me directly. The hall was quiet for a moment. Then Thresh in the back said, "Took you long enough, Lord." The laugh moved through the room before I could do anything about it. Senna looked up at me with that corner-of-the-mouth smile she did not perform for anyone, and I looked down at her. And for a moment the entire hall, the river, the 31 years of careful stone walls, all of it was simply the road that had led to this exact point. She put her hand in mine. Her grip was steady and warm and completely without ceremony. The hall bowed, not because I commanded it, because she was worth it and they had known it longer than I had. That spring, when the Sorvin threw off its winter ice and ran new and loud along the holds, Hessel's daughter was born, a healthy girl with Aldrich's dark hair and Hessel's eyes, who was placed, on the morning of her third day, in Senna's arms before she was placed in anyone else's. This was Hessel's choice. Senna held the girl against her chest, and the baby slept the way the wolf cub had slept, with the particular trust of small creatures that know they are in the right place. I stood in the doorway and watched and did not go in, because the moment was not mine to enter. Thresh's fishing operation that spring was the best in a decade. Something about the winter's cold snap having driven the deep fish to the channels she and Thresh had moved the nets to. He gave credit to the river. I knew better. The Havorn's southern border held through the spring and into the summer. The crevasse pack made one probing movement and withdrew. Dorvath sent a letter, brief, honest, the way he did everything that said only, "She tells me you asked her." Good, I sent back, it was past time. Marit found her way back to her wolf form fully that spring. She ran the east bank one morning at dawn, a long run alone, and when she came back she was shaking and smiling in the complicated way of someone who has found something they had been afraid was gone forever. I told Senna about it that evening. She did not say much. She looked at the river from our window and said quietly, "When you let people be witnessed, they can sometimes find their way back." I thought about the corridor, the grain store, her open regard the first morning at the gate when she had looked at what was actually there. "You witnessed them," I said. "I stood beside them," she said. "That's all." I put my hand over hers on the window ledge. The Sorvin was running the way it always runs, north to south, clear even in the cold, remembering everything and asking no one's permission. I had lived beside it for 31 years, and I had not understood what it was telling me until she came and stood at its edge in the morning mist and showed me that steady, open regard. She had not come to be a political instrument. She had come because her people needed a shield, and she had loved them enough to offer herself. And then she had arrived in my cold stone hold and been entirely, unapologetically herself, at the river before dawn, at the old wolves' sides, at the hearth with a grieving she-wolf, in the grain store corridor telling me the truth without cruelty. She had not been looking for me to become something I wasn't. She had simply stood beside me, and the man I was under 31 years of wall had found it enough to be seen. I did not need to perform for her. I did not need to be larger or more certain or less lonely than I was. I needed to be honest, which was what she had asked of me from the second morning, and which was, as it turned out, the one thing 31 years of careful ruling had not taught me to do for myself. The Sorvin ran. She leaned against my shoulder, and I understood, finally, what it means when a river that has run through every season, through the freezing and the thawing and the flood and the low-water summer, keeps running clear, not because nothing touches it, because it knows what it is. She knew what she was, she had always known. It had simply taken the river, and her, and the better part of a winter to teach me the same.